All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us for this important announcement. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Congressman Jerry Nadler. We're also joined by Maura Cowley from the Make Polluters Pay campaign, by Sarah Chifo from the League of Conservation Voters, Phil Rafford from the Sierra Club, and Mike Tidwell from the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And I will introduce them all a little more fully in a moment. But the reason we're all gathered here together is because we all agree on a simple but powerful principle, which is that polluters should pay to clean up the mess they have caused, and those who polluted the most should pay the most. We are witnessing the accelerating costs of climate change throughout the state of Maryland, throughout the country, and the damages are caused by a variety of man-made pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, including flooding around the country. In the state of Annapolis, in the state of Maryland, we've got flooding in Annapolis that is disrupting small businesses. We have flooding that's disrupting the Naval Academy. We have Ellicott City in Maryland, which has seen 2 1-in-1,000-year floods within a short period of time. That's just some local Maryland examples in terms of the costs of flooding. We also see the costs of drought around the country in the form of fires and other damages. Insurance. There are lots of places in the country right now where you can't get insurance to cover potential losses. And in many cases, the cost of insurance policies have gone up so much because of climate change that it becomes totally unaffordable. Healthcare costs in the billions and billions of dollars a year resulting from greenhouse gas emissions. So when you've got all these costs and all these damages, it simply makes sense to ask those polluters who have caused that harm to help pay to foot the bill. We should not ask consumers and taxpayers to have to pick up the entire tab for those costs. So the legislation we've been putting together is very much based on like the Superfund model. And I'm really pleased that today Congressman Jerry Nadler and I will be introducing the Polluter Pays Climate Fund Act. So I do just want to sketch out the key components of this legislation. Under this plan, the biggest U.S.-based fossil fuel extractors and oil refiners, as well as foreign-owned companies doing business in the United States, would be on the hook to pay into a $1 trillion polluter pay climate fund. The fee only applies to the heaviest hitters. These are fossil fuel companies responsible for at least 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions between the year 2000 and the year 2022. Each company's contribution to the fund would be directly proportional to the carbon emissions they produced in that time period. And the Treasury Department, in partnership with the EPA, would determine exactly how much each company pays into the fund based on the amount of coal, oil, and gas that the company has extracted or refined, calculating the emissions associated with those production numbers. This fund would be a big, big step forward in our efforts to address the damages caused by climate change. And importantly, it should have virtually no impact on energy costs for a couple reasons. It doesn't add to the marginal costs of production, number one, and it only hits the biggest fossil fuel companies, leaving many other companies in the market to compete with on price. So what do we intend to do with these funds? Well, we intend to help address harm and damages caused, to build resilient infrastructure to protect our communities, to provide funding for climate disaster planning and relief efforts to try to avoid the damage that we would otherwise see to our communities, to support the communities that have borne the brunt of the crisis, especially communities of color, and create millions of good-paying, homegrown jobs. Importantly, 90% of the money we raise to support will be used to support environmental justice for communities that have been most impacted by climate change. And importantly, the fund will not preempt state laws or lawsuits seeking accountability from big polluters. Since we put forward draft legislation back in 2021, we have already seen this polluter pays idea take off around the country. State-level climate superfund bills were introduced in my state of Maryland, in Massachusetts, and California. In New York State, their climate superfund bill passed the state legislature, and in Vermont, the bill was just signed into law. So thank you to all those around the states around the country who are pushing to do this. And now we want to bring it home to the federal government so that we can do this at scale on a national level. So let me just end again with the simple premise that I think almost all Americans agree with, which is when you make a mess, you should be primarily responsible for helping to pay to clean it up. That cost should not be transferred to our fellow Americans. So that's the idea behind the bill. Thank you for being here for the kickoff. I now want to turn it over to Jerry Nadler, who in addition to fighting for our democracy and for justice has been an environmental champion, including in the area of environmental justice. Jerry?
Well, thank you, Chris, for the introduction. I'm grateful for your work on this bicameral legislation, and I'm proud to lead it in the House. I also want to express my gratitude to all environmental activists here today for your unwavering dedication and commitment to this crucial issue. As we are all acutely aware, the climate crisis is not a distant threat. It is here, and it is escalating. This crisis poses an existential threat to our planet, and I firmly believe it's the most significant challenge modern humans have ever confronted. The urgency of this crisis cannot be overstated, and it demands immediate and decisive action. We know that fossil fuel emissions are the predominant cause of the climate crisis. Research tells us that 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions in the modern era can be directly linked to only 20 fossil fuel companies. For over 60 years, 60 years, these companies have known about their role in driving the climate crisis and have made massive profits from it. Despite this awareness, they have done little to nothing to address the harmful effects their practices have had on the environment and public health. In fact, for many years, they denied what they knew to be true about global warming. Instead, American taxpayers have been unfairly forced to bear the cost of mitigating the devastating impacts of the climate crisis, a burden that should rightfully belong to the companies responsible for it. Just last year, New York City taxpayers, New York City, not even state, New York City taxpayers were estimated to have forked over more than $2 billion to cover the costs of addressing the climate crisis. It is long past time that our nation put the health and well-being of our communities ahead of the fossil fuel industry. That's why I'm proud that our Polluters Pay Climate Fund Act will finally force the industry to pay its fair share to address the damage it has inflicted on our planet and help the American people tackle this crisis head-on. I'm also proud that nearly half of the $1 trillion that this legislation can raise will be used for investments that benefit environmental justice communities that have borne the brunt of this crisis. Congress has a responsibility to ensure that the planet we leave to our children and future generations is healthy, safe, clean, and habitable. Once again, I am incredibly proud to lead this legislation in the House, and with the window to address the climate crisis rapidly closing, I will do everything I can to get this signed into law as rapidly as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Nadler. And I want to join Congressman Nadler in thanking all of those who are gathered here, activists who are here today but around the country, who have been pushing for this for some time and are going to help us get it over the finish line. We have many leaders in that fight with us here today at the podium. So our next speaker has been leading and organizing in the fight against climate change for more than 15 years, taking on the big fossil fuel interests here in the United States and overseas. Please welcome Maura Cowley, the political director for the Polluter Pays campaign.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you so much to Senator Van Hollen and Representative Nadler. Today is a big day. Today is a day we're standing up and telling the fossil fuel industry, no, you will be held accountable for your climate damages. We're so excited to be standing here with all of you and everyone across the country who's fighting for accountability at today's introduction of the Polluters Pay Climate Fund Act. So again, just thank you both so much. This comes at a crucial moment. Throughout this summer, we faced another year of record-breaking heat and climate disasters. Anyone that's been in DC this summer knows that. And just today, you open up the news, we're seeing the impacts of yet another hurricane bearing down on the Gulf Coast. The urgency of this legislation cannot be overstated. And last year, in 2023 alone, the U.S. experienced 28 distinct billion-dollar weather and climate disasters, totaling more than $92 billion in damages. That's fossil fuel damages totaling $92 billion. It's time to hold big oil accountable for the damages they have caused. As Senator Van Hollen said, we're witnessing a tidal wave of support for climate accountability across the nation. From Vermont to California, over half of U.S. states are taking action to hold big oil responsible for climate damages. And this legislation builds on that momentum, offering a comprehensive solution to make fossil fuel companies pay their fair share. The American people have also clearly spoken on this issue. Our recent polling shows that 66% of the public support legislation like the Polluters Pay Climate Fund Act. 66%. That is not a tight margin. This isn't a partisan issue. It's about fairness, it's about an accountability, and that resonates for people across the country. The Polluters Pay Climate Fund Act is about creating a more equitable approach to addressing climate change. For far too long, the costs of climate disasters have fallen disproportionately on taxpayers and vulnerable communities. The Polluter Pay Climate Fund Act aims to rebalance that equation, ensuring that the largest fossil fuel companies contribute their fair share to climate solutions. By doing so, we can accelerate our transition to a cleaner, more resilient future while providing very much needed support to communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. Again, thank you so much to both Senator Van Hollen and Representative Nadler for introducing this critical legislation. We're going to work hard, and we look forward to continuing to build support for this legislation, and we thank you for everything you've done to protect communities and take action on climate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maura. Thanks for all your efforts. Next, we're going to hear from Sarah Chifo, who's the longtime Vice President of Government Affairs at the League of Conservation Voters, where she works tirelessly to advance solutions to build a more just and sustainable future for all Americans. Sarah?
So much. Thank you all. It is indeed a great day. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. As the Senator said, my name is Sarah Chifo, and I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs at the League of Conservation Voters. I am so proud to be standing here today at the introduction of the Polluters Pay Climate Fund Act that is led by these giants in the climate community, climate champions Senator Chris Van Hollen and Representative Jerry Nadler. We are so grateful to them for leading the charge to ensure that polluters, not taxpayers, foot the bill for the devastating impacts the climate crisis is wreaking on families and communities across the country.
Yes.
The truth is this. Big polluters are making record profits year after year. They're price gouging consumers at the pump. They are spewing pollution for free into our air that is fueling the climate crisis and harming communities. And low wealthy communities of color are being hit hardest and worst. The fossil fuel industry, as you heard from Congressman Nadler, has known about climate change for decades. Instead of acting, they've lied to the public, backed disinformation campaigns, fought efforts to address the environmental and human health impacts of the polluting industries. It's time, as you heard from Maura, that they face the consequences of their deception and they're held responsible for the actions that are destroying both lives and a livable and safe climate. This powerful bill has three pieces to it. It holds big polluters accountable, protects the health and safety of our communities, and finally puts people ahead of polluter profits. This groundbreaking legislation requires the biggest polluters, as you heard from Senator Van Hollen, to pay into a fund that will remediate and address the impacts of climate change. These investments are sorely needed. They will help rebuild and upgrade our infrastructure, clean up pollution impacts in frontline communities, and provide climate-related disaster assistance that is so sorely needed in communities across this country. And as you've already heard, importantly, this legislation sets aside at least 40% of the funds for environmental justice communities. This legislation builds on important progress being made in the states, including the landmark Climate Superfund Act passed in Vermont this year. Now, with all of this that we know to be true, it is beyond outrageous and unacceptable that extreme MAGA Republicans in Congress continue to do the bidding of big oil and big polluters at the expense of the health and safety of hard-working families. That's why I'm thrilled to be here today, standing alongside these incredible climate champions in Congress, and to be working today and the days going forward with environmental leaders and the community across the country to advance this critical legislation. And this legislation, I want to come back to a point that Senator Van Hollen made. It is popular, it is critical, and it is centered on the very powerful idea that we must hold the biggest polluters accountable and protect communities from the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, and to your team at the League of Conservation Voters. Next, we're going to hear from a representative from the Sierra Club, and I do want to thank Shruti from Maryland, Sierra Club, for being here. Thank you for your efforts. So our next speaker is a seasoned leader on climate action, clean energy deployment, and corporate social responsibility. After beginning his career knocking on doors for the Sierra Club in Missouri, he's gone on to lead environmental justice organizations like Greenpeace US and Power Shift Network. Last year, after knocking on doors in Missouri way back, he joined the Sierra Club as its chief strategy officer. Please welcome Phil Radford. Phil.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It is a great moment today to be standing here with you, Representative Nadler, Senator Van Hollen. Thank you for your leadership. This is an incredible moment where we're finally taking seriously holding polluters accountable at the national level. I also want to say it's an honor to be here with leaders of much of the environmental movement, whether LCV, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Mara, who's been a leader in many organizations for years. These are people who are working tirelessly, like our leaders in Congress, to protect families, protect communities, tackle the climate crisis, and hold polluters accountable. For way too long, fossil fuel companies, the sizes of countries, right, Exxon, $500 billion valuation, have lied to us, saying that climate change isn't real. For way too long, these companies have poisoned our communities, spilled oil, polluted our air, caused heart attacks, caused birth defects, caused all sorts of health problems, and gotten away with it, and expected you and me, the taxpayers, to bear the cost in our lungs, to bear the cost in our communities, and to bear the cost in our tax dollars. Today is an incredible moment where we are saying, no more. Clean up your mess. This bill is an incredibly fair way to hold polluters accountable. It is just, it is fair, but here's what you're going to hear. You're going to hear companies worth $500 billion telling you it's too much of a burden not to burden you with cleaning up their mess. You're going to hear them say that this could really hurt the oil industry, and they're going to ask for sympathy. And we know a $500 billion company can pay a little bit of its profits to stop stealing our health, to stop gouging us at the gas tanks, to stop stealing our tax dollars to clean up their mess. Communities have been suffering from the consequences of these actions for years, and it's time we just end it. We can't continue to expect taxpayers to pay the price for their pollution. We can't expect children to be the air filters for the pollution in our air with their lungs. We need to expect that these oil companies clean up their act now, and they pay for it. So we are incredibly honored to stand shoulder to shoulder with you two and with the environmental movement to make sure that polluters pay, that big oil and big gas can't get us to subsidize their pollution, that they pay the price for climate change and our health, and that we win this fight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Finally, batting cleanup here. It's my pleasure to welcome a good friend of mine, Mike Tidwell, the founder and executive director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. Mike and I have worked together since my days in the Maryland General Assembly, and he and CCAN have been among our closest partners as we worked over the years to turn the idea of polluter pay into reality. So Mike, my team and I have been very grateful for the expertise and passion you have brought to this effort. Please join me in welcoming Mike Tidwell to the podium.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Senator Van Hollen and Congressman Nadler, for sponsoring this incredibly important bill. It's easy to lose the impacts of climate change as an abstraction. It's, you know, the poles are melting, giant ocean currents are changing. I'm here to tell you that I live 6 metro stops away from where we're standing right now on the Red Line in Tacoma Park, Maryland. I am a member of the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church. And when I first became a member in the 1990s, we didn't have water problems at our church that anyone can remember. Starting in the 2005-2010 era, we started to notice more extreme rain events. The basement of our church, our assembly room, the floor started to sink from water. The whole floor is sinking. And we've experienced all kinds of impacts like this until September 10, 2020, almost exactly 4 years ago. In Tacoma Park, Maryland, 6 metro stops from here, we got 5 inches of rain in 1 hour. In 1 hour in Tacoma Park. That rain flooded Tulip Avenue, where my church is, just a block from my house, spilled over into the playground of the preschool and started flooding the preschool, where there were children age 6 months to 10 years old. This happened in our neighborhood. The church leaders went to the city and said, you have to do something about this. We're talking about a preschool flooding, like it never happened before. And the city said, we're broke. We've already spent our $500,000 in water management in the city. We have no money. And we kept saying, but you got to do something about this flooding. Finally, the city of Tacoma Park said, we don't have water money for you because we're patching together solutions to flooding everywhere in the city, but we do have sidewalk money. And they elevated a sidewalk on the side of the church where it floods by 14 inches, a perfectly good sidewalk. Nothing wrong with the sidewalk, busted it up, elevated it 14 inches, so the next time we get 5 inches of rain, the preschool doesn't flood. Who paid that $45,000 to elevate the sidewalk? The taxpayers of Tacoma Park. This is not just an Antarctica problem. This is a Tacoma Park Presbyterian preschool problem. And it's unfair that churches and small towns like mine have to pay this fee when the oil companies have created the product knowingly that's triggered this problem. So this bill is long overdue. And I really want to thank my friend Chris Van Hollen, who's been working on climate issues since the 1990s and has always come forward with progressive, cutting-edge ideas for how to solve it. This one gets right at the heart of justice. It gets right at the heart of suffering people, not only around the world, but right here where we live. And it's time to pass it. So I want to commit to you, Senator and Congressman Nadler. I am going to work tirelessly to pass this bill. I encourage all of you to fight really hard. Justice is due, and we can make that justice happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. And thank you for bringing it home to a local example where the Tacoma Park taxpayers had to pick up the tab that should have been paid for by the big oil companies. And if you multiply that 1,000 times across the state of Maryland and the state of New York and the country, you get some idea about why we need this bill to make the polluters pay, not taxpayers, not consumers, not folks at the church or the synagogue or the mosque or wherever it may be. It should be those who are responsible for the harm. So we're happy to try and answer any questions folks may have at this point. Yes.
Hi, Kelly Lenny with Bloomberg Government.
Yeah.
What is your strategy for moving this forward, given what I assume is going to be pretty robust Republican opposition to this legislation?
Yes. So my experience tells me that you've got to start by introducing a bill. It actually begins, of course, before that, with input from all of these individuals, all the activists, the efforts at the state level. But by introducing this now, we will begin to mobilize the coalition at the federal level. And if you look at many of the pieces of legislation that we passed, major bills, they don't pass overnight, but when you build that momentum and you build that public energy behind them, you can get them over the finish line when the political stars align. The Inflation Reduction Act has lots of provisions in that have been worked on for a long time. One of them was the establishment of a green bank. I introduced a green bank bill in the House in 2009. We now have a provision in that bill that's going to affect in the Inflation Reduction Act. So my point is, this now provides a piece of legislation for everybody to organize and mobilize around. And so we will do that, and then we will work to put together the co-sponsors and work to put together the votes to get it done. Ultimately, there are many procedural ways, as you know, to overcome resistance from a minority of the Senate, and so we're obviously exploring all those ideas as well.
Senator Von Hollen, Joel Erickson, sorry to bother you, but I prayed this would be a good time and place to have a town hall meeting about all this abuse everyone has witnessed. But is it not true that if I were to be compensated, I could donate all kinds of money, possibly start a company with the United States garbage disposal industry and make companies build factories that can like purify water. There are also energy farms and also, I don't know, carbon filter farms.
Yeah. So one of the things, yeah.
The possibilities endless though, if this problem could be addressed and I could donate to something like that. Same problems keep happening. Nothing is getting worse when it comes to climate change or corruption in, the office here. But,
Yeah. So you can certainly help by helping mobilize folks here.
I'm so sorry, Senator, but this is so near and dear to everyone's values. There was abuse done at Knox Presbyterian Church in January of 2019. The little girl was told to do a sexual exploited act on the tree next to me. And I would love to know if that was broadcasted on the internet.
Okay.
Are there any other on-topic questions?
We're going to have to focus on this. We're happy to talk afterwards about that.
Are there any other on-topic questions?
Okay, thank you. Are any other questions? If not, we can take one more and then we have a thing. Yeah.
I know there was a similar proposal for the Climate Act that was missed in 2021. So I'm just curious to know if there are any differences to this proposal from the 2021.
So in 2021, we put together a framework, a plan. We never actually introduced the bill because there were some issues we'd not completed, which are completed in here. So one of the main areas that we address in this bill is where we put the funds, right? It's $1 trillion fund, and in this bill we lay out very clearly how those funds should be distributed, and again, focused is in the ways that we've described. Okay? Thank you. Sure.
Emma with the
Yeah. Hey, Emma.
Is there anything in this proposal right now that could be taken out and passed at the executive branch level in the event that Vice President Harris becomes president next year, and would want to try to be helpful in this process?
Well, there's, first of all, I'm very much hoping that comes to pass and that we're dealing with President Harris in the White House. But in order to implement most of this legislation, I believe you're going to have to pass this legislation. I mean, that's not to say there aren't executive powers that could be, deployed for pieces of this, but this is to create a fund and make sure that we make those polluters pay. And to do that, we're going to need a bill. All right. Thank you all very, very much for joining us for this occasion. Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Thank you.
Good day. Yeah.
Thank you so. Andrew?
we have the money to surround everything with sidewalks. Right. And then we'll be fine. That's the solution. Yeah.
We finally found a solution to global warming. Sidewalk elevation.
Have you thought about adding in a fund for sidewalk elevation?
Yeah.
I think that could
Build one
save
around
that